Hey guys, Caleb here with DSLR Video Shooter, and welcome to part 3 of my 3-part video series on how I shoot B-roll. Now, we already did part 1, which was the surfaces I use in my B-roll table setup, so definitely check that out if you're looking for some fresh ideas as to how you can spice up your tabletop style B-roll shots. In part 2, we talked about lighting, and I talked about my elaborate lighting setup for that, some tips for lighting in general, and then we also looked at a super cheap way to do exactly what I do with something that costs around 20 to 40 bucks. In this video, we're talking about my camera setup, my camera settings, and how I actually film those shots that we've been talking about this whole time. So let's start with the camera. Obviously, right next to me, I have my trusty GH5. This is the camera I almost exclusively use for that style of B-roll, where I'm filming fixed objects or getting B-roll of me using things at the bench. There's a couple reasons why I like this camera. The first is just overall, it's a great image out of the GH5. I pretty much don't shoot anything but log anymore, and Vlog has been my favorite log profile to film on so far from all the cameras I have tried. Works great on the GH5. For the lens, I use the Panasonic kit lens, which is a 12 to 60 millimeter. It came with my G85, which is also a phenomenal camera. And what I love about this lens is the range. 12 to 60 is essentially a 24 to 120 millimeter if we're talking about full frame equivalent focal lengths. The point is I can go really wide and I can go fairly telephoto. So that is the camera and the lens. Now let's talk about tripods. Now this is a new tripod for me, or at least about a month, 2 months I've been using it. And it is the E-Image GH06. I think for around 500 bucks, it is by far the best set of sticks and fluid head I've worked with. I am absolutely blown away with the quality of this thing. So it goes really low, it goes really high, it's easy and fast to set up, and I have lots of fluid control. So right now it's at the heaviest fluid level. You can see here just with a finger, I can just barely move the camera and get crazy smooth moves. For the longest time, I have been using crappy, cheap tripods and getting pretty good results. So here is the tripod I used before this one. This tripod, I want to say, is around 80 bucks. So very affordable, but it's great and it gets a job done. There's no fluid control. It's just one fixed level. Luckily, it is very, very smooth at that level. So I've shot with this and similar tripods for years and years and years. You do not need an expensive tripod to do what we're going to do today, but it does make life incredibly lots easier. We're going to set this aside and we're going to head over to the bench and actually set up a little scene, film a little bit, and I'll talk about kind of my process for using the camera and settings. So looking at the main screen here, you can see that I'm shooting at 5.6 for my aperture. That can change depending on what's going on in the scene. For my shutter, I really like to obey the 180 degree shutter rule. So you'll see I'm at 180 degrees. Look up that rule via Google and you'll find some great stuff. For ISO, I stick it at native ISO, which is 800 on this camera, and with Vlog, which is what we're filming with. So you see a nice pretty image because the GH5 can display the official Panasonic LUT for Vlog. If I go in here, go and do my HDMI setup here, I'll go down and turn that off so you can see what Vlog looks like when it's naked. So there it is, no LUT is applied, and I can go ahead and turn that back on, and that's what the LUT looks like. And we can use that in post as well, which is super duper handy. For resolution and frame rate, we're going in here and we're gonna go down to my record quality. I shoot at 4K UHD 24 frames per second, and I shoot at 422 10-bit long GOP, which is less data than the monstrous 400 megabit setting on this camera. I'm going to YouTube, I'm not making a Hollywood film, so I'm more than happy to keep that 422 10-bit, but have that 150 data rate to keep, the files a little smaller. So that's a brief overview of the settings. When it comes to focus, I keep the camera set to manual focus. And if I tap and drag the screen here, you'll notice there's a little box, and when I release it, it will grab focus. This keeps it locked in once I'm done. So there's no autofocus beyond this point. Now let's talk a little bit about what focal length I use depending on the shot's needs. So by having a shot like this, where I have the lens all the way zoomed out, and I have the product or whatever I'm filming close, it gives a really unique perspective. So let me set focus here. And This perspective kind of feels like you're standing right next to me here, taking a look at this lens. It's very, intimate. Whereas if I were to move the camera way up and zoom in, which we will do, that's where you can kind of get more stylized stuff going on. But I can sort of simulate that now by zooming all the way in. And let's say we want a nice detail shot of this grip. Change my focus again. And I can go ahead and hit record on the camera and get a nice slow pan for some of that juicy, slow stuff that you guys ask about all the time. So that is what's great about this lens. You can get really compressed shots like this, or I can zoom out and get very intimate, shots kind of like this. So a couple different options with a single lens. Now let's go ahead and do my kind of bird's eye view shot from above. We'll be raising the tripod and talking about some cool tricks. Okay, we are way up high now, and I want to talk about some cool things you can do when you're using a tabletop with a tripod. So we're not using any kind of special boom arm for the camera. You can still get a really nice overhead shot with a tripod. So what I'm going to do is tilt down so you can see my tripod legs. And you can see we're kind of cattywampus, we're just pointing the camera at the table. But what you can do is, I'll try to do this live, is you want to position your legs so that they have two legs touching pretty much this table. Now you won't be able to really see this, but the third leg of this tripod is directly behind the camera. What I'm going to do is extend that, which will, in theory, tilt this whole thing closer to the table, getting us closer to an overhead shot. And now I can go ahead and tilt the camera back up. And as you can see, we're pretty close to straight above this Nikon camera, if not right above it. So that's one way you can get the camera overhead, even though I'm just using, a tripod next to the table. I'd recommend putting a sandbag on the back leg or some way to keep that rear leg that's fully extended locked in place. Now to spice up my shots, I usually add just kind of a little bit of prop work just to make it a little more interesting. Those of you who watch the channel know that this thing has been in a ton of videos. This little cheap plant, I'll link to it. It's on Amazon. Pretty great. So we'll throw that in there. I'll throw in a crappy cheap watch. And because this channel talks about video production, I'll use a color checker card here. Maybe we'll move this. Plop that in right here, put our fill board, again, huge difference adding fill. Maybe we'll do something interesting with this camera screen. Something like that, looks pretty good. Reset our camera, double check focus one more time. Hit record, and I'll do one of these numbers, just a nice slow pan, which is the majority of my B-roll. Hopefully it doesn't look choppy. Talking and doing this is kind of weird for me. But that's really it for using the camera like this with this tripod setup, which works just really, really well. Now there is one other setup that I'll do if I'm not just doing static shots like this. So let me zoom out here, and I'm gonna move some stuff around and have a nice clean wide shot. Okay, so now we have a much wider shot here, and this is kind of the thing I would do if I was talking about camera accessories. Getting a wider shot like this, maybe a couple props is appropriate, and then I can simply just add some stuff to the shot. So if I'm talking about this camera and how maybe you need an HDMI, angle thing, I don't know, I'm just grabbing random stuff that's near me. This just is a nice little way to mix it up, get a nice wide shot, don't move anything, everything's just locked in place. While I have this set up, often what I'll then do is detailed shots of the camera, either by zooming all the way in, or what I like to do to mix it up again and have some motion without the camera physically moving is to grab whatever I'm talking about. I'm going to set focus nice and close like this, and we'll close this screen. Maybe I want to talk about the grip experience on this camera and the button placement. You can see we've got kind of some nice shallow depth of field. We have our object closer to the lens, so the background's a little more blurred out. If I want more, I can open up my lens, and I'll go ahead and dim my light here until we get something appropriate. That looks pretty nice there. One more time, I'll set my focus, and now we're ready for the shot. So I'll usually set the focus, and then I'll just move it out at the same focus point, and then I'll bring it in. So now we can talk about the Nikon Z6. The button placement's pretty good on this camera. They do feel really cheap, and the dials aren't really anything to write home about, but overall the grip experience is much better than Sony cameras, blah, blah, blah. You guys get the idea. So this is a great way to have something interesting in the background. Get all that crap I forgot to move out of the way. And while you're all set up, you might as well use this whole setup for a thumbnail. Another nice thing with our lighting setup, which we've talked about in the past, is you don't really have to play with the lighting too much after you've set things up like this. You can kind of set it and now just mess around with different angles and find something you like without having to constantly move your light, which is just out of frame up here, by the way. For actual camera moves, I really don't stray too far from the good old-fashioned pan and tilt. Usually I just pan slowly at different focal lengths with different setups, and that's enough for me. I try to keep it simple and focus more on composition, kind of this mini set design stuff we've been talking about. And I think that can add a lot of value because not a lot of people are doing that these days. So you can kind of stand out by just using a straight up old school tripod. So that's really it, guys, for me and this setup. When it comes to the camera and lens setup, this is really it. There's nothing too fancy going on here. And hopefully this will give you guys a couple ideas for your own channels or video production. All of this is really applicable to product photography, and if you're shooting commercials of things, a great way to get a very simple setup, a little bit of camera movement, all without too much fuss. And that is how I film tabletop B-roll with a GH5, a tripod, and pretty much nothing else aside from the lighting setup and the tabletop stuff that we've already talked about in this series. I hope this has helped you guys out. Let me know if there's any questions you have. I'll do my best to, deal with that stuff in the comments. Links to everything we talked about will be in the description. Thank you so much for all the kind words with these last couple of videos. It seems to be helping a lot of people, and I really enjoy this style of tutorial stuff. So if you have any recommendations or things you would love to learn, let me know, and I'll do my best to get those in a video coming up here in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching again, and we'll see you in the next video.